March 31st, 1922, on a remote farm in southern Germany, 6 people disappeared without a trace. Days later, their bodies were discovered in one of the most horrifying crime scenes Europe had ever witnessed. More than a century has passed, yet the killer has never been identified. What makes this case so disturbing isn't just the murders themselves, it's what happened before them. Strange footsteps appeared in the snow, leading from the forest directly to the farmhouse. There were no footprints leading back. The family began hearing footsteps in the attic late at night. Keys mysteriously vanished. A newspaper that nobody recognized suddenly appeared inside the house. Every strange event pointed to one terrifying possibility. Someone may have already been living on the property. This is the mystery of the Hinterkaifeck murders. Hidden among the forests of Bavaria stood a small farm called Hinterkaifeck. It was isolated from the nearest village, surrounded by fields and thick woodland. The only sounds most nights were the wind, the animals, and complete silence. The farm belonged to Andreas Gruber, a 63-year-old farmer known for his strict personality. Living with him were his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria, Victoria's 7-year-old daughter, also named Cecilia, and her 2-year-old son, Josef. Only days before the murders, the family's longtime maid suddenly quit. She told neighbors she believed the farmhouse was haunted. She claimed she heard strange noises coming from the attic almost every night, and refused to spend another evening there. Most people dismissed her story as superstition. Then Andreas made an unsettling discovery. While walking near the edge of the forest, he noticed a fresh trail of footprints in the snow. They led straight toward the farmhouse. He carefully followed them, expecting to find a visitor or a lost traveler. Instead, the tracks ended at the farm. There were no footprints leading away. Andreas searched every building on the property, including the attic, the barn, and the storage sheds. He found nothing, or at least nothing that he could see. Within just a few days, every person living at Hinterkaifeck would be dead, and investigators would uncover evidence suggesting the killer had planned everything long before the murders ever began. On the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived at Hinterkaifeck. Her name was Maria Baumgartner, and it was supposed to be her first day of work. Her sister walked her to the farm before leaving. It was the last time anyone outside the family would see Maria alive. As evening fell, the isolated farmhouse looked peaceful. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The animals were fed, and there was nothing to suggest that a killer was already waiting. What investigators believe happened next is both calculated and terrifying. One by one, 4 members of the family were somehow lured from the farmhouse into the barn. No one knows exactly what drew them there. It may have been a strange noise, a cry for help, or someone they trusted. The first to enter is believed to have been Andreas Gruber. As soon as he stepped inside, he was attacked with incredible force. The weapon was likely a mattock, a farming tool with a heavy metal head, capable of causing devastating injuries. Before anyone in the house realized what had happened, another family member entered the barn. Then another, and another. Each met the same horrifying fate. The killer wasn't acting in panic. Everything suggests patience, control, planning. When police later examined the scene, they found evidence that the victims had not all died at exactly the same moment. 7-year-old Cecilia showed signs that she had survived for several hours after the attack. In unbearable fear and pain, she had pulled out handfuls of her own hair before finally dying. But the nightmare wasn't over. Inside the farmhouse, Little Joseph was asleep in his crib. Maria was likely finishing her evening chores. Neither had any idea that the rest of the family was already dead. The killer quietly entered the house. Moments later, there would be no survivors. 2 people still alive. Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, had been on the property for only a few hours. She had no connection to the family and no reason to become a victim. Yet she was found dead in her bedroom, killed before she had the chance to escape or call for help. Upstairs, 2-year-old Joseph lay asleep in his crib. The child never woke up. By sunrise, every person living at Hinterkaifeck was dead. But what happened next is what turned this case from a brutal murder into one of history's greatest mysteries. The killer didn't flee. Instead, investigators believe the murderer stayed on the farm for several days. Neighbors later reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney, as if someone had been keeping the fire alive. The family's cattle had been fed, and the animals appeared to have been cared for after the murders. Fresh bread had even been cut in the kitchen. It was as though someone was living inside the farmhouse, surrounded by 6 bodies. No one knows why. Was the killer hiding, waiting, or simply enjoying the feeling of complete control? Days passed without anyone realizing what had happened. The farm was isolated, and it wasn't unusual for the family to keep to themselves. But when young Cecilia failed to appear at school, concern slowly began to grow. A local mail carrier noticed newspapers piling up undisturbed. Neighbors began talking. Something wasn't right at Hinterkaifeck. On April 4th, several neighbors decided they could no longer ignore the silence. Together, they walked toward the lonely farmhouse. None of them could have imagined the horrific scene waiting inside. What they were about to discover would shock Germany and leave investigators chasing a killer who seemed to have vanished without leaving a trace. On April 4th, 1922, several neighbors arrived at Hinterkaifeck after days of growing concern. The farm was unusually quiet. No one answered the door. As they stepped into the barn, they froze. Lying beneath piles of hay were the bodies of Andreas, his wife Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia. It was immediately clear that this was no accident. The victims had suffered devastating head injuries, and the crime scene was unlike anything the local police had ever encountered. When officers searched the farmhouse, they made 2 more horrifying discoveries. Maria Baumgartner, the new maid, was found dead in her bedroom. Little Joseph was discovered in his crib. All 6 victims were dead. As investigators examined the property, the mystery only deepened. There were signs that someone had remained on the farm after the murders. The fireplace had been kept burning. The livestock had been fed and cared for. Meals appeared to have been prepared in the kitchen. Whoever committed the murders had stayed among the victims for days. But why? Police questioned dozens of people: family members, neighbors, travelers, former workers, anyone who might have known the Gruber family. Rumors spread across Bavaria. Some believed the killer was motivated by revenge. Others suspected a robbery gone wrong. But that theory quickly fell apart. Money and valuable belongings were still inside the farmhouse. Nothing of importance had been stolen. If the motive wasn't money, then what was it? Investigators also uncovered a disturbing detail. Andreas had previously reported hearing unexplained noises from the attic and finding footprints leading only toward the farm. At the time, no one took those warnings seriously. Now those strange events suddenly seemed far more sinister. Had the killer been watching the family for days, or even secretly living on the property before the attacks? Despite an enormous investigation, police found no clear answer. The evidence pointed in every direction and nowhere at all. Over the years, investigators identified several possible suspects. Some believed the killer was someone the family already knew. Others suspected a former farm worker seeking revenge. There were even rumors involving Victoria's personal relationships and disputes over little Joseph's paternity. But despite countless interviews, no one could be linked to the murders with enough evidence to solve the case. One of the most disturbing theories is that the killer had been hiding on the property before the attacks. The unexplained footsteps, the noises from the attic, the missing keys, the unfamiliar newspaper. On their own, these events might seem ordinary. Together, they paint a chilling picture of someone secretly watching the Gruber family long before the murders took place. Another mystery remains just as unsettling. Why stay after the killings? Investigators found evidence that someone continued feeding the animals, keeping the fire burning, and moving around the farm for days. Whoever did this was calm enough to remain at the crime scene, despite the constant risk of being discovered. Was it confidence, or did the killer believe no one would come looking? As the years passed, many of the original witnesses died. Physical evidence was lost, and forensic science in 1922 was nowhere near what it is today. Modern investigators have reviewed the case several times, but without new evidence, the truth remains out of reach. More than 100 years later, the Hinterkaifeck murders are still considered one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in history. Somewhere in the quiet countryside of Bavaria, the abandoned farm is gone, but its story refuses to disappear. The identity of the killer, the real motive, and the terrifying events that unfolded during those final days may never be known. So here's the question. If someone really was hiding on that farm before the murders, how long had they been watching? And if Andreas Gruber had taken those strange footprints seriously, could 6 lives have been saved? If you enjoyed this mystery, subscribe for more true crime stories, unsolved disappearances, and cases that continue to puzzle investigators around the world. Because sometimes, the most terrifying mysteries are the ones that are real. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Fact Nova for more true crime, unsolved mysteries, and the darkest stories history has never fully explained. And before you go, what do you think really happened? Who do you believe was responsible? Let us know your theory in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, some mysteries are never meant to be solved.